Have you ever felt like Jesus is asleep at the wheel? Something difficult is happening to you, and it just feels like God doesn't care. Your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. And if you were really honest, it feels like God has abandoned you, or he's certainly not paying attention, almost as if he's asleep. Well, it's interesting because in Mark chapter 4, that happened to the disciples. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 and following, it says that Jesus is on the sea with his disciples. A big storm is going on. And then it says in verse 38, he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. I mean, it's enough to be asleep during a storm and not helping your followers, but to be asleep on a cushion, really? And some of us may feel like, God, you got this cushy job up in heaven, and I'm down here suffering and hurting and sick and got cancer and struggling in a relationship. And it sure feels like you're comfy cozy and you're not really helping me. Well, the disciples felt that exact thing because they say, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And so I just thought this passage is great because we, like the disciples, sometimes feel like God's asleep, we're perishing, he's not doing anything. Well, then what happens? They wake him up. So that's key. They went to Jesus. They actually asked him to help. And sometimes God is just waiting for us to call upon him. He says in Jeremiah 33:3, call upon me, and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you do not know. James 4 says you have not because you ask not. So the first thing we got to do, like the disciples, is call upon the Lord. Turn to him, wake him up. Not that you literally wake him up, but in your heart it feels that way. You're calling out, you're crying out, you're sharing your need. And they were honest. God, don't you care? Jesus, don't you care that we are perishing? Then what happens? Jesus calms the storm. He moves in power. And that will happen in our lives. It may not happen as quickly as we want, but God promises that he will answer, that he will come to our help. He's a very present help in time of need. And here's the deal. Sometimes God shows up and calms the storm on the outside, changing circumstances, healing our body, doing a miracle externally. And listen closely to this. Sometimes the outward doesn't change, but he calms the storm in our heart. He gives us a peace and a settledness and a comfort. And even though nothing's changed outwardly, a huge change has occurred inwardly. And sometimes that's the greater miracle. The person who doesn't have things go better in their life, but they have peace in the midst of suffering, or they have a settledness and a new depth with God in the midst of the hurricane, where God creates in your heart that eye of the storm, where everything's swirling around you, but in your heart you have a peace that surpasses all human understanding, and it guards and keeps your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And so when you feel that Jesus has abandoned you, left you, is asleep, isn't answering your prayers, you're not alone. The disciples felt the same way. So don't beat yourself up, but don't stay there. Do what they did. Call upon the Lord. Seek the Lord. Get in the Word. Get in prayer. Share with a trusted friend that you're struggling, and make that effort to call out to God, to exercise your faith, to stand on His promises, to worship Him. That's a huge step of faith, to worship God when you don't feel like it, and then wait and watch and see God do a big, big work in your life. Maybe you could share in the comments below how you've experienced this, or if you have a question, email me davidholt08 at gmail.com. And I hope this encourages you today.